Hello, UCAR. Peter Christensen here, coming to you from the CEO's desk. We're going to continue our deep dive into the Code of Ethics. So I wanted to talk today about Article 2. I think this is kind of an overlooked aspect of Article 2, but a very important one. And it's perhaps the most common way Article 2 is violated, in my opinion. It says, realtors shall avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts relating to the property. Pertinent facts relating to the property. So generally we think of the condition of the property, not hiding defects to the property. But it talks also about the transaction. That's what I want to focus on. So you have a buyer who's marked on the REPSI, who per the REPSI, I should say, per the REPSI, will deliver earnest money 4 days after they go under contract, right? After the offer is accepted. And let's say it's, $5,000 of earnest money. And it's day 5 after going under contract, buyer's agent still doesn't have the earnest money. So at that point, what position is the buyer's agent in? I talk about this in my classes that at this point, I believe there arises a duty to disclose the fact that you now have a problem in the contract. So let's walk through it. What do you have? You have a promise contained in the contract, the REPSI, that the buyer will deliver the earnest money by a deadline. The buyer has missed that deadline. So we have a promise contained in the contract which has gone unfulfilled. Well, that's pretty much the definition of a breach of contract, right? A promise contained within the contract that goes unfulfilled. Well, if we have a breach of contract, what does that allow a seller to do? It allows the seller, triggers that breach of contract section where now the seller has options, including canceling the contract. So would you say that that's a pretty material bit of information? I would say yes. If a seller can cancel the contract based off of the a defect in the contract, the breach of contract, then I would call that a material breach. So is that a pertinent fact relating to the transaction? I would argue yes, it is, which in my mind kicks in Article 2. And a duty to not exaggerate, misrepresent, or conceal this fact. So as you go on throughout the transaction, and maybe you're asking for the earnest money, and the buyer's just not, I'll come up, I just need to send it over. Do you take Venmo? I'll send it over to you soon. And they're taking their sweet time. And in the meantime, you're communicating with the other side, and you're not ever mentioning this. You're having your buyer sign addenda without mentioning this. I could make a pretty good argument that you're misrepresenting the fact that there's been a potentially fatal breach, a material breach in the contract, perhaps concealing it by not bringing it up. So I always say the time to have this conversation with your buyer is not at 4 o'clock on day 4. Hey, I need your earnest money within the next hour. The time is when they write the contract, when they write the offer. You got to have this earnest money to me by this deadline, whenever it gets accepted. I need it within this amount of days. Here's how you do it, work out how it's coming, and get it done. Now, can you fix this? Could you communicate with the seller, the listing agent, and extend the deadline? Absolutely. It's troubling when you receive it after and don't mention it, or seller knows and just says, that's fine, but nothing's in the contract. it just leaves ambiguity now. Do you have a reason a seller can go back? That starts to be an argument of whether they've given up the right to cancel the contract based off of that. So don't put your buyer or seller in that position. Deal with it. Get an extension. It's the proper way to do it, the rock solid way to do it for both parties. But better than that, just make sure it doesn't happen. Communicate with your buyer. Let them know you're under an obligation to inform the other side if you do not get that earnest money received by the deadline. And certainly don't misrepresent or conceal the fact that it is not there, because I believe you are probably in violation of licensing law and most likely in violation of Article 2 of the Code of Ethics. So be careful. We will continue with our deep dive into the Code of Ethics in our next video. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, this is not legal advice. This is legal information only. If you need specific legal advice, please contact your attorney.